Hello, my wonderfuls. How are you? Today I am broadcasting live from Miss Armstrong's dining room, and we are going to be learning about the Revolutionary War. Do you want to say hi, Rosie?
Hi.
This is my daughter, Rosie. Do you know about the Revolutionary War?
No.
You don't? Do you know what war is?
Yeah, I have a sister.
You have a sister? Yeah, she does. What's your sister's name?
My sister's name is JoJo.
Jojo. What are you guys doing?
Right now we're painting and making crafts. I want to show you guys something soon.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to get going on our lesson today while they're painting. Jojo, you want to say hi?
Hi, Ty.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. All right, go paint. Mommy's working. Okay. So now that you have met the children, we can get started on learning about the American Revolutionary War. So we are going to have a series of 4 lessons. And after these lessons, you're going to have a test over social studies. So this is our social studies lesson. After our social studies lessons, you will have a test over the Revolutionary War. That is going to be, I believe, on Friday, May 7th. So here is our first lesson. It's core lesson number 1. Before you get going, I would like you to get out a notebook, and I would like you to get out just a notebook and a pencil, and I want you to write the date that you are watching this at the top. And I would like you to stop, pause my video, write the date. You can write Social Studies Lesson 1, Declaring Independence. So put that at the top of your notes, and then you are going to write down your 4 vocabulary words for this lesson. They are independence, declaration, rights, and treason. So here's your 4 vocabulary words that you are going to be writing in your book. So while I am reading this to you, we'll be discussing and you'll be taking notes in your notebook. That will help you better understand these concepts. So we can see that on our timeline, this unit here for declaring independence is 1775 to 1776. If you're listening to this, you have already written down the date. You've written down Social Studies Lesson 1, Declaring Independence, and you have these 4 vocabulary words jotted down as well. So we're going to start by building on what you know. You may have a birth certificate at home. This paper tells you when you were born. In a way, our country has a birth certificate. It's called the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration marks the beginning of the United States. So the steps to independence. The main idea of this next passage is that common sense and debates in Congress change people's minds about being ruled by Britain. So common sense is something that you need to know about. Common sense is an article that was written by a person called Thomas Paine. So Common Sense is an article about Thomas Paine, and it started to change people's minds about being ruled by Britain. At this point in American history, we were a colony of Great Britain still. So we were not America yet. We were not our own country. We're not the United States of America. We were a colony of Great Britain, so they ruled us. After the battles of 1775, the American colonies and Britain were at war. However, not all colonists felt this was right. Many still thought of King George III as their ruler. They did not want a war with Britain. Other colonists were patriots. They wanted independence. Independence means freedom from being ruled by someone else. Patriots felt that independence was worth fighting for. Patrick Henry, a patriot from Virginia, said in a thrilling speech to a group of Virginia delegates, "Give me liberty or give me death." Another patriot, Thomas Paine, used the written word to argue for independence. Okay, so in your notes, 2 things that you need to write from this page is that patriots wanted independence from Britain after the battles of 1775. What is independence? Independence is freedom from being ruled by somebody else. So that's important. That's going to be on your social studies test. Independence is freedom from being ruled by somebody else. You are also going to need to know what a patriot is. So in your notebook, I would like you to write the word patriot. And patriots are people who want to be free from the rule of Great Britain. So the Patriots are the people who did not want to be under the Great Britain rule, and they fought for independence from Great Britain. Thomas Paine wrote the article Common Sense. So he is an important person to know while you're taking your notes. You probably want to pause and write Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. Also, Patrick Henry is another important person. Patrick Henry was bold. He had bold, persuasive speeches that moved colonists towards independence. So Patrick Henry had bold, persuasive speeches. So Patrick Henry was another patriot. So next we're going to talk about Thomas Paine and the article Common Sense. In his pamphlet, Common Sense, Thomas Paine argued that the only choice that made sense was to separate from Britain. So you can see the cover of his pamphlet right here. Who is Thomas Paine addressing his ideas about independence to? It says, addressed to the inhabitants of America. So he's addressing it to the people who lived in America. Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense in January 1776. Common Sense was published for independence. The pamphlet was brief, inexpensive, and easy to understand. Paine wrote that King George treated colonists unfairly. He claimed that the only way to stop this was to become independent from Britain. Colonists bought over 100,000 copies of Common Sense within a few months. George Washington said, I find Common Sense is working a powerful change in the minds of many. Thomas Paine put into writing what many of the boldest patriots were already saying. He wrote that colonists had nothing to gain and much to lose by staying tied to an unjust king. So you will need to know what common sense is, and you will also need to know the role that it played on the debates in Congress. So Common Sense showed how the king had been treating the colonists unfairly to discuss separation from England. I would pause and write that down. Common Sense showed how the king had been treating the colonies unfairly to discuss the separation from England. Debate in Congress. Delegates to the Second Continental Congress had read Common Sense. Many agreed that independence from Britain was necessary, but they also knew it was risky. Britain was a powerful country. King George III was already gathering soldiers to attack the colonies. Could the colonies stand up to Britain? Some delegates also worried that not enough colonists wanted independence. However, support for independence was growing across all the colonies. John Adams argued strongly for independence. More and more of the delegates agreed with his point of view. At last, on June 7, 1776, a Virginia delegate named Richard Henry Lee asked Congress to officially declare independence. So let's review. What were Thomas Paine's arguments for independence? So Thomas Paine's arguments for independence, they wrote that the king treated the colonies unfairly and said the only way to stop this was to become independent from Britain. You can see this caption here is called Writing the Declaration. It took Thomas Jefferson 2 weeks to write the Declaration. When he finished his draft, 4 other delegates helped edit it. Shown here are Benjamin Franklin, right there on the left, John Adams, right there, and Thomas Jefferson, who is standing. Declaration of Independence. The main idea of this next passage is that the Declaration of Independence explains why the colonies should be free. Congress asked Thomas Jefferson and 4 others to write a Declaration of Independence. A declaration is a statement that declares or announces an idea. Congress needed a document to declare why the colonies had to become independent from Britain. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wrote what many Americans believed about their rights. Rights are freedoms that are protected by a government's laws. Jefferson argued that all people are born with rights that no one can take away. He wrote that people have the right to live, the right to be free, and the right to seek happiness. Jefferson argued that a government should protect these rights. If it does not, then the people have the right to start a new government. The ideas in the Declaration were not new. Jefferson used ideas that John Locke and other English thinkers had written about. Locke said that government should serve their people. Jefferson listed many ways that Britain did not serve the colonists. For instance, King George had tried to take away their rights. He had forced taxes on the colonists and sent soldiers to control them. Jefferson showed that the colonists had many reasons to separate from the king. They had the right to create their own government. I'm sorry. Okay, so down here, this is a very famous part of the Declaration of Independence. Sorry, this isn't going as smoothly as I had hoped for. So here is a very famous quote from the Declaration of Independence. You will be hearing this a lot in your life, and this is where it comes from. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Have you guys ever heard about the pursuit of happiness, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? This was a big idea that Thomas Jefferson had that he wrote in the Declaration of Independence. He thought that everybody had a right to pursue happiness. He thought that everybody had a right to live their life and have liberty, which is freedom. This woman in this picture is named Mary Catherine Goddard. Congress hired Mary Catherine Goddard, a printer, to print an official copy of the Declaration. So I know she was one of your choices for the famous Early Americans Project, and some of you picked her. She was actually a printer, and she was hired to print the first official copy of the Declaration of Independence, and that made her pretty famous. And women have a big part in our history, too. Now, parts of the Declaration. You can read the full text of the Declaration of Independence on different pages of this book. You can also just Google the Declaration of Independence and read it. The Declaration begins by promising to explain why the colonies must break away from Britain. The next section explains that people have rights that cannot be taken away. It says that all men are created equal. And the longest section is a list of complaints against the king. The last section argues that colonies have to be free to protect the colonists' rights. It declares that the colonies are independent. So since it declares the colonies are independent, we call this the Declaration of Independence. We're declaring that we are independent now. We are not going to be ruled by Britain any longer. At the bottom of the document, delegates to Congress signed their names. John Hancock, President of Congress, signed his names in large letters. So today you will often hear things like sign your John Hancock, and that means sign your signature. And that's because John Hancock is so famous for signing his name very, very big. So let's look at the Declaration of Independence. This is a copy of the original one. Do you notice this date right here? July 4th, 1776. What do we do every year in the United States on July 4th? It's called the 4th of July, right? We are celebrating our independence as a country. We're celebrating our independence from Great Britain. That is the day that we declared that we were going to be independent. We are no longer going to be ruled by Great Britain. You can see John Hancock's signature there. So if somebody asks for your John Hancock, they want your proud signature. Here's a picture of signers of the Declaration of Independence. So Thomas Jefferson presents the document to John Hancock and the Continental Congress. This is Thomas Jefferson right here. and John Hancock. He is the man sitting down right here. That's John Hancock. He signed his big signature at the bottom of the Declaration. Right here is John Adams. And you can see Benjamin Franklin is right there. These were all choices for your famous early Americans, too. So, the importance of the Declaration. The Declaration sets forth basic ideas of freedom and equality. That's our main idea. So, if you were writing notes, you might want to stop here and you might want to write the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. The Declaration sets forth basic ideas of freedom and equality. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress voted to accept the Declaration. The delegates knew that signing the Declaration was dangerous. Britain would call it treason. Treason is the crime of fighting against one's own government. Anyone who signed the Declaration could be charged with treason and hanged. Yet delegates signed. In your notebook, you have the word treason written down. You're going to want to pause this and write down the definition of the word treason. Treason is the crime of fighting against one's own government. You could be killed for treason. The punishment for treason is usually death. Treason is a big deal. The Declaration was read aloud to excited crowds across the new nation. People tore down pictures and statues. The Declaration was read aloud to excited crowds across the new nation. People tore down pictures and statues of King George. They celebrated by ringing bells and firing cannons. The Declaration of Independence marked the moment when Americans chose to rule themselves. Equality then and now. The Declaration is important today because it states that people of the United States believe in equal rights for all. Today we know that Jefferson's words, all men are created equal, include everyone. Women as well as men, every race, every group, every ability. Is that what the words meant when the Declaration was written? Probably not. So when it said all men are created equal in the Declaration, back when it was written, I think they literally meant all white men are created equal. Today, we know that everybody, men, women, every single race of people, Black people, Asian people, white people, Hispanic people, everybody is created equal. People who might have disabilities, people who are older, people who are younger. We do not discriminate no matter what. Everybody is created equally. In 1776, all Americans could not exercise the same rights. Only white men who owned property could vote. Many believed this was unfair. Abigail Adams wanted Congress to recognize the equal rights of women. She wrote to her husband, John Adams, "In the new code of laws, remember the ladies." So it was not equal for women at first. I know some of you did your famous early Americans over Abigail Adams, too. She was the wife of future President John Adams, and she asked him to remember women when they were creating the new laws for this new country, the United States. It took years, but women, African Americans, American Indians, and other groups have gained equal rights. In later lessons, you'll read about important laws that guarantee these rights. The Declaration has inspired people past and present to work for liberty and equal rights. And why is the Declaration so important to Americans? It was the first time that we said we were going to be an independent country who was not ruled by anyone else. So we said we were going to be independent or separate from other people who wanted to rule over us. Lesson summary. So if you are taking notes, which you should be, get out your notebook. So for the lesson summary, the colonies decided to declare their independence from Britain. So that was the Declaration of Independence. Congress asked Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration states that everyone has certain rights and no government can take away. Why it matters. The ideas in the Declaration of Independence have meanings today. The rights of freedom and equality that Jefferson wrote about are important American values and principles. Here is a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. was a great leader in the struggle for African Americans' equal rights. He and his wife, Coretta Scott King, led many marches to protest unjust treatment. So down here is a timeline. You can see that Common Sense, that pamphlet written by Thomas Paine that criticized British rule and said why it was unfair, was published in January 1776. And in July of 1776, July 4th, the 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence was signed. So you need to know what independence means, and you need to know what the words rights means. So remember, independence means freedom from being ruled by someone else, and rights are freedoms that are protected by a government's laws. How did common sense help to lead to independence? So Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, was a pamphlet that showed how the king had been treating the colonies unfairly, and it discussed separation from England. So why did the delegates need courage to sign the Declaration? If you go back into your reading, remember that signing the Declaration of Independence was dangerous because Britain would call it treason. Treason is the crime of fighting against one's own government. And if you are charged with treason even today, you probably wouldn't be hanged today, but you could get the death penalty today if you're charged with treason or fighting or conspiring against your own country. Who was Patrick Henry and what did he believe about independence? So Patrick Henry was a bold patriot, and he gave persuasive speeches to Congress, and he thought that people should be independent. Remember that patriots are people who believed in independence and fought for the independence. How many months before the signing of the Declaration was Common Sense printed? Now here's Common Sense, that's in January, and the Declaration of Independence was signed in July, so January, February, March, April, May, June, July. It was just 6 months later, or half a year later, that Thomas Paine published Common Sense, and then the delegates of Congress signed the Declaration of Independence. So here is your first lesson in our social studies lesson over the Revolutionary War. I hope that you took really good notes. You can go back and reread this on your own, and you can study this on your own. So this is all what happened right before and when we signed the Declaration of Independence. What do you think is going to happen next? We signed that Declaration of Independence. Do you think that Great Britain's going to be happy about it? What do you think Great Britain is going to do? You will find out in our next lesson.